couple of years ago, I enrolled in a course in new evangelization while I was at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And this course was quite insightful, and it covered everything from the history of evangelization to methods now being undertaken to evangelize parishes around the world. Now, since we were in Washington, a few classmates and I decided to drive over to Baltimore to see the famous parish known for its rebuilt new evangelization program. It's quite famous if you actually have heard of it. Now, if you don't know this program, it aims to re-evangelize struggling parishes by undertaking several initiatives meant to renew parish life and thus draw people back to practicing the Catholic faith. And in fact, it actually borrows a lot from the Protestant ministries, and actually they actually admit that. So for example, it might include a wide variety of youth programs. They had like from 0 to 3, 4 to 7, 7 to 10, and then there was like the teenagers. There were greeting parties. So not only, first when you went into the parking lot, they'd help you find a car. If they found that you were new, you got the space right next to the church. They'd also even walk you to your seat and say, hey, great, welcome. Come on, let me walk you to a seat that we have reserved for you. They have online chats, live streaming during the Mass, and actually interactions with people at home who were watching the Mass at home who maybe had questions about the faith. There were homilies, post-Mass discussions, or pulpit talks. There was large bands with energizing praise and worship music. There was even a coffee bar, pizza lounge, and other like donut area built at the back of the church. Now, while this is very popular, and I could see how it would be appealing to a wide variety of people, I left Mass that Sunday feeling empty, a bit troubled. Now, don't get me wrong, the people in the parish were very welcoming, they were very friendly, they were very dedicated to the mission of evangelization, and they truly loved Christ. But no matter what I could shake, something was troubling me. And in fact, it was even troubling my classmates. And on our way back to Washington, after reflecting on it, we found that while there are many good elements that could and should be implemented in many parishes around the world, there was something very key missing, namely a focus on God's role in the process of evangelization. And in fact, when I often examine many of those parish evangelization programs today, I notice something in common. I'm not saying this to slight anyone, as these parishes and pastors are doing great things, and they really have a great heart, and they really want to see them revived. But I find the focus so much is on how we, as clergy, and the laity alone, through our own talents, abilities, strengths, whether it be through good preaching, amazing dynamic interactive music, pulpit talks, online blogging, you name it, how this alone will revitalize and fix the church, as opposed to what God can do through us, including through our own individual holiness, to fix and help draw people back to the faith. In a sense, it is like God has taken that pinch hitter role whereby we only call on him when we need something big or something drastically is failing or going wrong, then we turn to God. Otherwise, we can do it ourselves. And now I bring this up because it relates very well to the message we hear from today's readings of the need for a spirit of rootedness, a poverty of heart and abandonment, whereby our love and trust in God takes priority above all. Unlike the rich who find their consolation and strength in abundance of goods, worldly measures, one's talents and abilities, who find themselves frustrated, lacking in peace, we as Christians are called to place our hope, draw our strength, and to find our success in God by simply loving him and trusting in him above all other things. And we see this clearly presented in our first reading, whereby Jeremiah echoes the words of today's responsorial psalm, whereby he describes the misfortunes of those who trust in themselves versus the prosperity that will come to those who love God above all things and are willing to fully trust in him no matter what they face. Today's psalm, as I mentioned, also reminds us that those who love and fully trust in God will be like a lush tree that is planted beside flowing waters, where it will be fruitful and find its life sustained no matter what comes upon it, whether it be drought or disease. Likewise, Luke's version of the Beatitudes reminds us of the power of loving God above all things and fully trusting in his care as well. For example, when we face poverty, need, grief, sickness, unpopularity, all those illusions that we tend to have about our own strengths, our own powers, our own abilities tend to slowly disappear, and we are left with nothing. But we actually have what is really essential. Essentially, when things fall away, we begin to discover the truth of human life, namely that our only true anchor, nourishment, strength, prosperity, can be found not in material, but in the spiritual. And the problem is that despite what we hear proclaimed today, our society as we know, especially in North America, tends to rely less and less on God for our strength, our success, and our abilities. And we rely more on our worldly endeavors. We essentially love worldly things more and more, and we place our hopes in them, and God takes that back seat. And this may be why Mother Teresa once famously said, and you've probably heard this quote before, "The poverty in the West is a different kind of poverty. It is not only a poverty of loneliness, but also of spirituality. There is a hunger for love, as there is a hunger for God. There is a hunger for love, as there is a deep hunger for God." Now, before you think this problem is reserved to the laity who have fallen away from the faith or maybe have little understanding of God's love for them, we know that it is sadly lived out in many parishes by many priests and many seminarians all around the world. For example, you see priests who, well-intentioned and often dedicated, strive to make their parishes successful and active by turning only to those worldly solutions alone, like I mentioned at the beginning. For example, their talents and abilities will be what will change and revive this church. Instead of drawing their strength from God, seeking to know and to do his will for that particular parish or that project, they immediately turn to themselves and think, if I just give those amazing homilies, I will save this parish. My academic smarts are so good that I will convert people back to Jesus by proving how secularism is wrong. I will convert people because I am just so smart and I'm so talented that I can change everyone. Or the way I do liturgy will be good enough to save people. I am so dynamic, so loving, so personable. I can win and I can re-evangelize this parish. Now, don't get me wrong, all these things are good and necessary and we desperately need them, but can too often come across that these worldly solutions are more important than God's grace. That these items alone, and not God, will be the things that will change the church. And it is no wonder why we often find pastors who do such things become frustrated as they experience the results failing. As they say, I was supposed to be amazing, but nothing's coming from fruits. It comes up and then those people leave. I have 55 people in my RCA class, but by June, only 2 come back. What's going on here? So that begs the question, what needs to be done? What can we do? Well, I'd encourage you to ask yourself, maybe examine yourself and say, where do I draw my strength, my mission? Whose will do you seek to implement above all in your day, in your ministry? Essentially, what do you love above all? In whom do you place your trust and your hope? Is it in your talents, the talents of your hired staff, worldly solutions, parish programs, parish missions, or is it in God? Essentially, where do your spiritual roots find their strength, their will, their focus? Where do your spiritual roots draw their strength from? The source of God or the source of the world? I bring this up because, as we know, what you do here in the seminary is what you will often end up doing in the parish. So we need to examine ourselves now. Secondly, heed the advice from such great resources as the saints, but also, again, there's a great book, as none of you know, I've quoted, and Father Charles has quoted a lot, Abandonment to Divine Providence, which reminds us that holiness simply consists in loving God above all things, and by simply carrying out his will each moment of our lives. After all, when we aim to draw our strength, our roots from carrying out his will, we will not only be able to endure whatever may come our way, but we will find happiness and ongoing spiritual peace, even in those trying times, because we can see God through it, and we know that we are walking with him through it. It is when we stop loving God above all things and turn to ourselves or worldly solutions alone that we know we will find ourselves disappointed, weak, spiritually drained, and often frustrated at the results that we are achieving. One way that will help us to endure all things, while the other way will help us to endure very little. Which option will you choose? Which option are you choosing now? And so, my brothers, as we continue with this Mass, let's ask the Lord not only to help us to recognize how we are approaching God in our lives right now, but more so, let's ask him for a renewed spirit of love, a renewed spirit of trust, abandonment in him. After all, without this spirit, we will be missing out not only on what God wants and can do with us, but we will also be missing out on what God can and will do for us in helping to revitalize the church that so desperately is looking forward to encountering God at this time.